This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 27.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba. During a co-ed soccer game... During a co-ed soccer game... Do you want to talk? What do you want to say about that?
Hello, SE Nation, and welcome to another show. I have a special treat for you coming from a different continent, which is great. I've already had one gentleman from United Arab Emirates, but he was in Canada when I interviewed him, so it doesn't count. This is my first interview from somewhere in Europe, which is great, and I'll get to that in a second. Actually, I got no housekeeping to tell you, other than the usual subscribe, rate, review, and all that. So let's skip that for today and just discuss today's podcast. My interviewee today, my guest, is Daryn Mason. Daryn worked as a sales engineer before there were sales engineers. So he was an engineer who helped salespeople out, and before there was a formal position. So he's been around for a while, and now he is writing blogs and consulting and mentoring and all that stuff. So he is trying to give back to the SE nation, which is what I try to do as well. And today we talk about a lot of stuff. We talk about objection handling. We talk about some of the SE mistakes, some skills that SE should have. So I really enjoyed my conversation with Daryn. He's very knowledgeable. And without further ado, here's the interview. Good afternoon, Daryn. Welcome to the show.
Oh, hi, Ramsey. Good to speak to you.
Likewise. Thank you for being here. I know you have a long breadth of experience, and I'm happy to have you on the show so we can discuss this, I would say on air, but I guess on internet in this situation.
No, it's great to be here as well. It's always nice to share some of my thoughts on solution engineering and pre-sales.
Great. So let's get started. Maybe we can discuss a little bit of your history, who you are, where you're from, and
Okay. Where do I start? Well, my name's Daryn Mason, of course, and I'm currently an independent speaker, blogger, and facilitator in the area of customer experience. So this is this whole area of sales, marketing, customer service, e-commerce, and that type of thing. But my pre-sales career goes way back, probably to about the mid-1980s. I always joke that it's 20 BC, which stands for before cloud, because it was the old mainframe mini computer area. And back in those days, of course, pre-sales wasn't even a thing. You didn't even know you were a solution engineer. You were maybe a software developer, and you used to ride along with sales guys every now and again to explain to customers or prospective customers how stuff worked. And then suddenly, that morphed into a profession. Later on, I worked for a lot of small companies up until about 1995, and those companies were doing both, like fourth generation languages, for example, where I was a programmer, a developer. And I also went into the area of commodity trading systems, healthcare information systems, those types of things, just small suppliers. But I guess in 1995, my big breakthrough was joining Oracle on the tech side, and was a pre-sales manager in that context. And I decided to join Siebel Systems in the year 2000. I guess Siebel, that was the first time that really people focused a lot of attention and training and preparation on the art of demos, really, and the art of solution engineering as a profession. And in the mid-noughties, cloud became prime time, and I was assigned to Siebel's very first cloud product, something called Siebel On Demand. And Siebel required, as most of you will know, in 2006. And I progressed my pre-sales leadership career within Oracle. And I was leading the Western European team for customer experience for Oracle. So in those days, I had about 140, 150 solution engineers in my organization. And it went from there. It didn't look back really. But in later years and months, I've just decided to go independent and share some of my experiences with others. So a very long-winded answer, Ramsey, to your question, I'm afraid.
Well, no, it's actually good because I have a few questions as a follow-up.
Yeah.
So can you give an example of a fourth generation language for those folks who don't know what it is?
Yes. So firstly, in context, third generation languages, the kind of higher level languages like C and BASIC and COBOL and those types of things. So very procedural languages essentially. Fourth generation languages were what we used to call declarative. So this is where you had a screen painter for the first time. You could define the functionality of applications by basically taking options, saying what the format of fields was, saying where it appeared, dragging and dropping, stuff like that. So it was really one of the very early, fourth generation development environments where you didn't need those high skills in order to write applications. If you were a good business analyst, you could get your head around these four GLs, as we called them, and write applications essentially.
So instead of remembering formats and syntaxes for codes, you can just
exactly,
draw something out and comes out as a software.
Exactly, yeah. And so I was a developer on that project, and it was great fun. And then half of the team essentially went into enhancement and maintenance mode of the project, and there's other guys like me that would go along with the sales guys and show people how this worked and try and sell it. So that was my first exposure to solution engineering, really, although I never really knew it. And just to put that into context, Ramsey, these were the days where it was very difficult to do on-site demos unless you loaded the software onto the customer's machine, which I did on several occasions, and that was from kind of quarter-inch tape. And we used to use overhead projectors for our demonstrations. And later on, we even had a glass tablet that mimicked an 80-column terminal that used to put on top of an overhead projector, if you remember those. And if your bulb went in your projector, you were in trouble. So you always used to carry spares around with you. So it was my first lesson about contingency was in those days.
Yeah. So like I am a millennial, if you want to. So yes. I have no idea what you're talking about, but I'm at a point where I take that stuff for granted, where you actually had to carry your projector around, because right now all my customers have their own projector systems.
Yeah,
and it's a good idea to have one as a backup, but nobody does that.
I know, and everything's so much more reliable these days as well. So you don't have, you're not kind of flying by the seat of your pants so much.
So why did you choose to be one of those engineers who went with the salespeople to do the demos?
Yeah, good question, really, because it wasn't so much of I chose that direction as they chose me, really, because it was like a self-filtering exercise within a small sales team. The people that just turn out to be good at explaining software to the customers in a way that is kind of compelling and not too complex, and people can understand it, and you hide some of the rougher edges of it, because the software in those days wasn't terribly kind of pretty or reliable. Then you got a reputation with those guys for doing a good job, and so you'd be selected to go along again. And as long as your manager let you out for a day, it was fine. And so even at the end of my time with my early companies, I was never a full-time solution engineer like you have today, because again, it wasn't a recognized profession back then in the same way as now. So you were always borrowed from the job that you happened to be doing at the time.
So you were a good engineer who wrote good code, who happened to also be good at explaining stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Essentially, that was it, and that's all you needed.
So I was. Are you familiar with Quora and Reddit? Those websites or forum websites. So I was reading a question on there, like, who becomes a sales engineer or solution engineer? And one of the responses was a failed engineer. And that really pissed me off because, like, we're actually good engineers who just know how to explain stuff. So,
well, the interesting thing is as well, the key component of that is communication skills. Actually,
yeah,
engineers that we had, they were brilliant. They were brilliant minds, and they could solve any problem, but they were very poor communicators and couldn't even explain how they had solved a problem to a customer. And as well, when you get really good engineers, they have this complete to finisher sort of gene where they can't just explain something simply. If they show you their watch, they have to take it apart and tell you how quickly a crystal vibrates inside to give you a reference signal for the time and all that sort of stuff, which it's just way too much information for most people. So it's a bit tongue in cheek saying they're failed engineers, but I was just a much better communicator than I was a software engineer, I guess.
Yeah, well, or you were good at both, and you just chose the, I guess, more profitable way of going, possibly. All right. So you mentioned that in the last few months or years, was it, that you decided to go to work for yourself?
Yes.
So why would someone who's successful working for their own company, or not working for a company as a successful engineer or marketing person or customer experience person, decide to give it all up and start his own business?
I wanted to try different things. I mean, if you bear in mind that if you combine all of my Oracle and Siebel experience together, because essentially it was I went from Oracle to Siebel, back to Oracle again. That's 23 years in that environment, and I felt that I wanted to try new things, do some of my own projects. I absolutely love doing keynote speeches around customer experience, so I wanted to do a whole lot more of that. So I just wanted to take a few years out to do those personal goals and personal projects, really. And I'm pretty sure, by the way, that I will end up working back in a corporate environment, working in pre-sales with a new challenge, with new teams, because what I really miss now is the whole kind of mentoring and coaching of the next generation of solution engineers, which I'm really keen to get back into. So it's really, I guess, just a kind of changing direction for a couple of years, just to kind of refresh my perspective on the world of customer experience and the world of solution engineering and those types of things.
You are like unofficially mentoring a lot of SEs through the blog post that I saw, which, by the way, I loved, and I'm a little bit jealous. And by doing this podcast, hopefully people can find you, and I'll have your LinkedIn profile. Because do you have your own website, or is it all your articles are through LinkedIn?
Yeah, I don't yet. I publish blogs through LinkedIn primarily. I also do some work for a consultancy called Digital Leadership Associates, who are one of the top social selling consultancies, and I've done a few blogs on there as well. But essentially, my solution engineering blogs are all on LinkedIn at the moment, and I've only really just recently, in the last maybe 6 months, started writing blogs on solution engineering. Actually,
yeah, same here. Actually, even less. But I read yours. I'm gonna have a link so that people can check them out.
Excellent. I appreciate that.
Well, it's my pleasure. The whole point of this podcast, and I guess I sound like a broken record. I wanted to build a community for SEs so we can all learn from each other, because I didn't find a source out there. Now I'm finding a little bit more.
Completely agree.
Yeah. So the more we can actually share resources. Actually, I'm writing a blog about all the different resources that are available for SEs.
All right.
You're one of them,
That'd
by
be
the way.
I mean, the reason why I started blogging in the first place is that I do a lot of blogs on customer experience subjects, and they get pretty good readership. But I don't know why, but I wrote one blog on pre-sales, on solution engineering. It's my first one, and it was called Fourth Generation Solution Engineering, and it just got hundreds of likes and scores of comments. And I thought, there's something here that is underserved. There's some need for this type of content for a community of people that's way underserved. I mean, just to compare, if you ever try and count, Ramsey, how many articles are written about sales and sales methodologies and how to be a better sales guy,
Millions.
and there's every angle is covered.
Yeah.
And then if you try and count the amount of content that's out there, which and I'm talking about practical, usable content, which is what SCs and SCs really appreciate. To me, with a very high utility value, there's almost nothing. There's almost nothing out there. And so I thought, well, let's just try and write a few more articles, on different areas, different subjects, and they've all got great comments and great readership, and I'm absolutely delighted, about how they've been received. So that's encouraged me to continue, really.
And you should. Like, I enjoyed reading it. The two that I read, I will continue to read your stuff when they come out. But let's. I wanted to talk to you, since you've been in this role or not this current role. Like, you've been in pre-sales for a long time. What are the common SE skills that you found useful for SEs? That's a bad way of putting the question. Throughout your experience.
Yeah. So when I hire SCs in the first instance, and you're looking for that kind of raw talent, the sort of skills I'm looking for are essentially the things that you can't teach. You can teach a lot of things, and I'm happy to teach a lot of things, but there's some things you can't teach, and those things tend to be around attitude and self-awareness. And self-awareness is really important, because for me, what separates a good SC from a great SC is being able to see their own content viewed through the customer's lens, if you will. So being able to basically wear the customer's spectacles when you're looking at your own content and say, am I going too fast? Is this too complicated? Is this too superficial? Do I need to increase my pace? All of those things. And so that type of awareness for me is kind of the generic core skill that I'm looking for. And everything else on top of that, you can teach. The technical, the kind of application, the navigation, all of those things, and all of the kind of techniques and other skills. But you do need people to have that base awareness of how they come over and how they appear to an audience. So that's the things. They're the kind of first things that I look for.
Self-awareness. Is there anything else that you would look for?
I guess it goes along with self-awareness, but people being able to kind of critique their own work, because we do work in teams as solution engineers, and we need to leverage those teams better. But when everybody's busy and they're all maxed out, and especially if they're all remotely based, you don't always get that instant feedback. And so being able to critique your own work, but also pushing things to a higher level, because we are in a competitive marketplace, which is the part of what we do. We have to differentiate our solutions above our competitors. And so I find that the solution engineers that are continually thinking, what could I do with this demonstration here to make it better, to enhance it, to make it memorable, so that in 1 week or 2 weeks' time, a customer says, "Oh, I remember that guy. That was the guy that came along and did ... whatever that is." the things that sticks in a customer's mind, preferably in a good way. But these are all the things that people learn. Now, when people start off in solution engineering, they're not going to be the finished article from the get-go. There's a lot of experience and maturity that needs to go into that development. And so, if people are saying, well, there's a lot of boxes that I'm asking people to tick, then you really build it up over time. Think of it like you're collecting skills. I wrote a blog called "Who Wants to Be a Solution Engineer?" A bit like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? It had the same kind of graphic on the cover, and I'd kind of created a pyramid of skills that people need to have, a kind of hierarchy of skills there. So it's worth having a quick look at that to kind of understand what I'm talking about.
Right, I'll have that in the show notes. So if we could again and get it, let's get into an example. If someone is bad at communication today, but he's self-aware about that, is that still okay? Or
no, I think it is. If people are self-aware enough to know they're bad at communicators, then it's a great starting point, because half of the battle has been won, right? I remember when I was working at Oracle, back from 95 to 2000, I didn't really consider myself as a great presenter. And by that awareness on its own, I joined a public speaking club, a little bit like Toastmasters. You have Toastmasters over there, right?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, so I joined that sort of thing because I thought, well, if you're aware that you have that deficit, well, then do something about it. So what can I do about it? I can go and join an organization or get some skills where I'm getting that constant feedback of from people who are not giving you feedback because they just like to criticize people, because they know that in 10 minutes time they'll be standing where you're standing and you'll be giving them feedback. So it's coming from a very caring place. So if in the case that you just mentioned, it's that's an easy one to solve, really. And it's just what I find about communication skills, and when I'm coaching speakers in more advanced speaking skills and speaking techniques, a lot of what you have to do there is unlearn some of the things that were hammered into you in your younger days. When we all went to those presentation skills courses, the presentation skills 101, stand still, take your hands out of your pockets, don't rattle those coins in your pocket, don't walk around too much, all those sorts of things. And sometimes you have to unlearn those things, because what I've found is the best communicators, the best presenters are the most authentic, right? So they know who they are and they're being themselves. They're not trying to be something or somebody different. So once people find that unique voice inside them, I find that they become really excellent communicators and excellent presenters.
Okay, I have a follow-up question and a follow-up comment about that. So you're mentioning over, like, we have Toastmasters over here. Maybe you can let the people know, where are you located?
Oh, so yes, good question. So I live in Edinburgh, in the United Kingdom, and in fact, the version of the Toastmasters here when I started way back then was called the Association of Speakers Clubs, the ASC, which I think is still going in the UK alongside Toastmasters, if anybody's interested over here. But I think Toastmasters is a pretty international franchise as well, so you'll probably find a chapter of Toastmasters in most countries, I would think.
Thank you for that. The quick comment, you heard of Tim Ferriss?
I have heard that name, yeah.
Yeah, so Tim Ferriss, he's a public speaker. He has a few books, and the first time he did a TED Talk. I'm not sure what the topic was. And he said the way he practiced for his TED Talk was trying to present the TED Talk in front of a couple of Chihuahuas. And he said if he can capture their attention for 10 minutes, that means he can capture anybody's attention for 10 minutes.
I like that.
Yeah, so for all of you guys who don't have Chihuahuas, buy some and start practicing.
Excellent. I like it. I'm sure it's not the best reason to buy Chihuahuas, but it's a good one.
Yeah, well, if that's the only reason, maybe you can rent some.
Exactly, yeah. I like it.
So basically, what you're saying, if I understood you correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you have self-awareness, you can overcome any lack of skill anywhere else because you're
Yes,
aware of it and
absolutely.
you can fight to get better at that
Yeah,
skill.
yeah,
Okay.
completely as well. And there are other things as well. That then you build on top of that. There's a very old-fashioned word I like using from time to time called perspicacity, and perspicacity is the ability to catch on to concepts very, very quickly, to learn very quickly. And so I often look for evidence when I'm hiring people that they have the ability to go from zero to a pretty good level of knowledge in a very short amount of time. Because as solution consultants and solution engineers, we often have to pick up functionality at very short notice and appear to be proficient in that technology. And again, that's a great skill to have. But again, if you think that's a deficiency, there are ways of there are learning techniques, like mind mapping and that type of thing that can help you get up to speed with complex subjects in a very short space of time.
Mind mapping? Do you mind explaining that a little bit?
Yeah, so I use mind mapping a lot because, and I think it depends on how your mind is built. Again, it's back to the self-awareness thing. I'm very right-brained, which means that I learn and I work a lot on imagery, and therefore, if I'm going to learn a new subject, say I'm learning some functionality, then I will create a mind map on one sheet of paper that and the different angles on a particular subject, and each branch goes into sub branches of that aspect. For example, you might want to say, well, I want to learn about the competitors. So one of the branches of a product is competition. Then within the competition branch, there will be a branch for each of your main competitors for that area. For each competitor, you might have one branch that's all the ways that they're better than you, and another branch which is all the ways that they are worse than you, and so on and so forth. You can build a complex tree and a map, but just by looking at it, because it's very spatial, it's a way of learning complex subjects very quickly. Because with the way my brain is engineered, visual things stick much more readily than just a list of stuff on like 10 pages of foolscap notepaper.
All right. So we talked about the skills and the mind map. Like I'm actually looking at a mind map right behind me, which reminds me that I need to look at it more often.
I have a mind map in front of me now, which is all of the potential things that you might ask me.
Nice. Well,
so I'm asking. I'm using that for this podcast.
So yeah, and that's something SEs could be using for like while preparing for a demo, like and try to anticipate.
I'd really recommend it. It's a really great way of doing it. Stephen Buzan has got a lot of books out about how to effectively use mind mapping. So if it's not a skill that you have and it sounds like it's something that would work for you, I'd highly recommend that you go and grab a book or two off Amazon.
Okay, Stephen Buzan, Bouzan, Z-A-N.
It is actually. I've got one of his books here. It's not Stephen. It's Tony Buzan.
Okay.
My correction, and it's Buzan. Buzan.
Okay, good. I'll have it in the show notes. All right. So we talked about the skills. What are some of the common mistakes you see SEs doing?
Oh well, that's a really good question. I think some of the common mistakes that I see is firstly going from something I've already said, and that is a failure to see themselves through the customer's eyes. So they're not seeing how they present themselves to a customer. Other common mistakes that I see: too little discovery work done on the customer before people start presenting their demonstrations. And the problem is, because these things are foundational, if you don't have your discovery done well, then it affects almost every other aspect of your demo or your presentation. So if you have done discovery, you probably won't understand what the KPIs are of your customer's business, what their objectives are, which are all things that you need to relate your demonstration back to with so that your customer can understand the benefits in context with their business. Something we've chatted about before, Ramsey, is this whole area of SEs descending into a feature function show. And I'm just my current blog that I'm working on. I'm halfway through it, and it was inspired by the conversation that we had. Is how to banish the feature function show, and I see it time and time again. Where you stand in front of a sales engineer, and they just say, "Well, when I do this, this happens. If I click this button, a nice graph appears. If I click this button, the graph turns into a pie chart," and it's all factually correct, but of absolutely no business use whatsoever to a customer. Very low level stuff. So that's, you're descending into the feature function thing, and which is really another branch of the next area of mistake that I often see made, and I call it it's the urge to submerge. It's this submarine thinking that a lot of technical guys have, especially people that may have come from a software engineering background, and that is this urge to go into way too much detail and complexity for a customer, and so you kind of lose the point, the business benefits of the software or the application that you're showing. And my final point, my final mistake that I think we're all guilty of, and that is not enough rehearsal. Everybody rehearses their demos, but some people rehearse in front of the customer, which is a really bad thing to do, right?
Yeah, that's a live rehearsal, yeah.
Live rehearsal, yeah. So even if, when I do presentations, just keynotes and stuff like that, if I stand up on my own and just talk through the narrative of a presentation, then the second time I do it, the next time I do it, I can notice the improvement, even if it's just the improvement in simplifying the way you explain a particular area, or using fewer words to convey some important points without using kind of throwaway words like but, maybe, to be honest, things like that. Even if you just rehearse the same thing twice, it gets better by virtue of the fact that you've rehearsed it. So it's not just simply to make sure everything works, although you should always do a technical rehearsal to make sure that your solutions hang together. But just in terms of the narrative that you use, it's so important to have that honed down and smoothed down so that you're not tripping over your words and confusing the customer. So always plug in some time for rehearsal. And you know what? Sometimes you just don't get the chance, and I'll hold my hands up and say I've been there. But experience will get you through sometimes. Experience will allow you to wing it on the odd occasion. But if you play that game all of the time, then you're basically throwing a dice every time you're doing it. So maybe every now and again when you're really up against it, but 90% of the time you should be rehearsing.
May I add one mistake to your list, which kind of dovetails into the last point? I see a lot of people not doing rehearsals mainly because they allow their salesperson to control their schedule.
Yes.
So
yes, that's a very good point.
I believe SEs and a lot of AMs don't know that they're doing it. They just think that's what they're supposed to do, and they don't know what the SE's job entails.
Yes, so there's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah. So I feel like SEs should be able to communicate more. A lot of SEs are afraid to communicate. Just tell your sales guy. I do that all the time, and my sales guy listens to me because I'm the expert in my domain. He's the expert in his. Yes. So if I tell him I need more time or I need better discovery, it's like, okay, go ahead and do it. So.
And that's not going to get any better either. And it's a consequence, really, Ramsey, of we're in an environment now where the ratio of sales to SCs is getting bigger and bigger, right? So on average, each sales consultant or solution engineer is servicing more sales guys. That's just the nature of the industry we're in. And that breaks those relationships. It dilutes those relationships that you have. And so if you're not working with the same salesperson all of the time, you don't build up that rapport, that way of working to understand exactly what each other's roles are in a presentation or a demonstration. And so it's even more important to make sure that people understand what our role is as an SE.
Yeah, I'm lucky enough to only have one sales guy. That's
great.
So, and we're both in the same city, so it makes it easier for me.
Perfect.
But
You're
people,
living,
yeah,
living high on the hog.
yeah, I'm very lucky. So I wanted to talk to you about, like you mentioned, don't go into feature functions, don't go into too much details. What are they supposed to do instead?
So, very, very good point, because I'm right in the middle of writing that at the moment.
Nice.
So the main tool that you have at your disposal, firstly, is understanding the higher purpose. I call it the higher purpose. So let me give you an analogy, right? If you're a driving instructor and you're telling a pupil, a learner driver, how to use all the pedals and the wheel and the gears and everything else, that's fine. That's kind of feature function. But if you're a learner driver, your higher purpose is that you want to be able to go from A to B whenever you want to. You want to visit places that you've never visited before. You want freedom and flexibility. So it's those things. It's the freedom, the flexibility of being able to go anywhere. That's your higher purpose. So you really shouldn't be down at the level of saying here's where the indicator works and this is how the brake works, which is what we often fall into. So the tool that I use for that, the primary tool, I call it the kind of so what tool, or the downward arrow tool. And what I do is I take a particular feature or a function that I'd normally say, oh, this happens. Let's say it's some analytics, right? It's a graph or something like that. And you show it. Ask yourself, so what? Or ask yourself, what does that mean to a customer? And so you go to the next level. So, okay, so if I show this graph, it will give me in real time exactly what my sales force are doing, for example, on a day-to-day basis. So ask the same question again. So what? What does that mean you can do? So if you know what your sales force are doing, it means that you can better manage your resources and have the right salespeople on the right opportunities. Ask yourself the question again. So what? What does that mean for you? Well, if you have the right salespeople on the right opportunities, it means that you can increase the win rate of those opportunities, or you can maximize the revenue that comes out of those opportunities. And now we're starting to really get to the KPIs that are going to impact the business. Because if you've got a more effective sales force, if they are working on opportunities that they are uniquely skilled to deliver and close, then you're going to improve your bottom line revenue. So when you're showing a feature, very, very quickly move from that to saying, well, if you have this information, it means you can always make sure that the right people are assigned to the right tasks, and that's going to have a direct impact on your bottom line. So it changes your narrative when you start doing that test across your features and functions. So a lot of people call it different things. I call it the downward arrow kind of test, because you go as many arrows down as you need to before you get to what the real higher purpose of that area of your demonstration is. And it's always good to work with somebody on this. So if you are working with a sales guy, be transparent. Say, I want you to look at this demonstration and highlight to me where it's just feature function and where it doesn't really have a higher purpose, and start from there. And there's a lot of other additional techniques you can use on top of that core technique, like whiteboarding, telling, like having day in a life type of scenario demonstrations, those types of things. So there's a lot of additional techniques, but the core technique is applying that so what test to whatever you're showing within your demonstration. And you know what? If there's no so what to it, if you never get to a higher purpose, then you really need to consider losing that part of your demonstration. however much it might hurt.
I would recommend that everybody go back and listen to the last couple of minutes, because that was great. And you're not the only one. Like, the so what question comes up when you're talking to high achievers, like SEs who are high achievers. When I'm like, especially when I started like showing stuff, like, yeah, why are you showing me that? Well, because of that, and we keep going. And I came to the conclusion that the feature function demonstration is not a demonstration; it's more of a training, and that comes after they buy.
Yeah. So. You're exactly right. It is, and that's why I use the driving instructor analogy, because the driving instructor just wants to get you driving; they don't care. But if they were selling driving lessons, you wouldn't sell driving lessons by saying, if you come to my driving lessons, I'll teach you where the indicator is on your car. I'll teach you where the ashtray is. I'll show you how to get into the glove box. You're not going to sell any lessons. But if you say to somebody, hey, look, you want to drive around the north coast of Scotland and see the beautiful scenery there. There's no other way of doing it. If you learn to drive, then you're going to be up there, looking out over the highlands and the lochs and all these things. It's that stark a difference between the two approaches, and I exaggerate to prove a point, but I'm sure the people understand.
Well, I think you just sold a airplane ticket to Scotland.
So. Well, the more the merrier.
All right, cool. I'll see you there.
Yeah.
All right.
Great.
All right. How about we talk about? So we still have a few minutes. How are you doing with time? Are you okay?
I'm pretty good. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, go ahead.
Great. So I wanted to talk to you. One of the how I found you was by finding a blog about objection handling.
Yeah.
And that was a great blog. You talk about objection handling and then the different types of customers or SEs.
Mm.
So let's talk about it. What are the common ways or the best ways that you find are for objection handling?
So objection handling is a subject that I tackled. One of the first ones that I tackled in a blog, because if it's done badly, it can destroy everything that preceded it. Right? If you have even the best demo, if you have a bad Q&A session and you have bad objections that aren't well handled, it can destroy all of that great work that you've rehearsed long and hard for. And so it's an area that I'm quite passionate on, because when you see it done really well, it is a skill. It's a real art form. So when I wrote that blog, I wanted to get over two principles. Firstly, I wanted to get over the fact that there are some 101 techniques that everybody should use to tackle objection handling. One of my favorite is the 3 C's technique that you may have read about there, which is whenever you get a question, especially if it's a complex question, sometimes they are, use the 3 C's. So clarify the question first. So even if you think you understand it, by clarifying the question, you prove that you're treating the question with respect and that you're listening really well, which is a great skill. So clarify the question. Say, if somebody says, what version of Microsoft Windows is this compatible with? And you might say, well, okay, so you want to know the operating systems that our solution runs against. And even if it's a minor clarification, just do it anyway. The other thing that it does is it buys you thinking time. And don't underestimate an extra 10 seconds of thinking time. It's great. So when you've clarified the question, the next C is conciseness. Now, this especially annoys me when I'm interviewing people. You'll ask them one question and they've gone for the next 5 to 10 minutes on answering the question. So give a concise reply. But once you give them the concise reply, you can always say to people, do you want to hear a bit more about that? Is that enough for you? Or would you like some more information? And then you can give a longer reply if you want to. And finally, the final C is confirm that you've answered their question. So once you've given an answer, say, does that answer your question? Or is that okay for you, or did you have any other related questions? Just make sure you've done it, because if you just move on to the next question, or you move on with the next section of your demonstration, you have no idea whether or not you've given a good response to that question. So it's always good to get that confirmation. There's a bunch of other stuff there in that blog, which is, I'm sure people will find useful. The second half of the blog, by the way, is the other graphic that I drew on the cover, about the different personas that you get within within an audience group. So by understanding the motives of the people asking the questions, it gives you a much better idea of the type of answer they're looking for. And so, as you know, I cover everything from Honest Jane, that's just there to do an objective evaluation of your solution against other people. So they're very straightforward people. But then at the other end of the spectrum, you might get your smart aleck, who's just there to show how clever they are and, how brilliant they are at understanding their personal domain. And you also get the Trojan horse, of course, which is the competitor's friend that puts those awkward landmine questions in front of you that they know you're particularly weak on. So, I'll give some tips there about how to handle each one of those different persona types within your audience.
Yeah, I'm gonna have a link to that in the show notes as well.
Great.
It's a good read. I liked it. So a comment about the 3 C's, and I don't know. I've never been a customer. I've always been, I guess, an engineer. So I've never had to buy anything. But I've done interviews for people, and sometimes I ask questions and they don't do any of the C's, so they don't clarify the question. They take too long to answer, and turns out it was the wrong question. That wasn't the question in an interview, I just let them go on so I can see how this ends. I don't interrupt them and tell them, no, this is not the question. I just let them go on and realize, okay, these are not they're not even listening to my question. So here's a tick. And I feel like customers do the same thing. They're looking for a reason not to buy from you.
Yeah.
So
the other thing is, I think customers have got a certain amount of time, and they might have a lot of questions. And by over answering a question, you deprive them of the ability to ask all the questions they want to ask.
Yeah, and I don't feel like customers would interrupt your question, or at least some will not interrupt your question, your answer, to tell you, no, this is not the question that I asked. They just let you keep going, and just basically you just lost the deal. Yeah. But is that true from your experience? Do you find customers actually try to correct you, or?
Yeah, well, especially in the UK, the British are very polite.
Yeah, same in Canada.
And so they think it might be rude if they interrupt you and say, actually, that really wasn't the question I was asking. You're more likely to get that interruption actually from your own team, who say, I don't think that's the question that the lady was, or the guy was asking. And which brings me on, one of my funniest personas is actually your own sales guy. And I come across this all the time, Ramsey, where there's a young rookie sales guy, and they think you've missed something obvious that might clinch the deal. So from the back of the room, you get this question saying, oh, could you just show them how it integrates with blah, blah, blah. And there's a good reason why you haven't gone there, but the sales guy doesn't understand that reason. And so they really throw you under a bus. And getting out of those situations, I call it in my blog, I call it friendly fire, because that's exactly what it is. It's well-intentioned, but very unwelcomed by the solution engineer. But I see it so often. You wouldn't believe how many times that happens.
Well, I've read the book Demonstrate to Win by Robert. I'm not going to say his last name because I butcher it.
Great book, actually. That's a great book. That's the Demo to Win guys, yeah.
Yeah. So inside it, he actually said that he did the same thing where somebody was demonstrating, and then he told him, hey, why don't you show that little thing? And the guy just stopped. Now, for some reason, they're all salespeople who do demos in that aspect, so they're qualified to do demos. So, but the other guy who's doing the demo stopped and actually told him, here you go, come in and show them. And it was a contentious situation, but I would prefer to react like that versus trying to explain why I don't want to show it. All right, so
the kind of in terms of objection handling, and again, it's something that I see a lot of times. A customer will ask a question, and the first instinct of the solution engineer is to go right back to the software and try and show them the answer to the question. But if you've already built up a good level of trust, which you should have by that time, you don't have to dive back into the software. If you can do it, just say, yep, yeah, we support that fully. You don't have to dive back in and do something that's unrehearsed, because that can so easily go wrong.
It usually does during demos. Almost
Usually does, yeah.
Everything that can go wrong will go wrong. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So just and it goes back to that thing I was saying before about the urge to submerge.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's the comfort zone for a lot of SEs is to dive back into the software. That's where they're happy and warm.
Yeah. A quick note about that. I feel like a lot of objection handling can be taken care of during a good discovery.
Yeah,
that,
I think you're right.
That being said, it's very hard for anyone to discover everything. So if people are thinking that, discovery would solve that, but discovery would limit the amount of objections, but they're still going to have objections. Especially
what discovery, and I find what discovery does as well is if you're doing discovery and you're chatting to one of the audience members one-to-one, they'll often ask you that question that they would normally ask, in the demo, and it gives you a chance of really preempting that and really answering it during your demonstration, rather than waiting for the Q&A.
Except for the Trojan horse, who will
wait
to destroy you in front of everybody else. That's
the whole
fun.
point of the Trojan horse is to do that, isn't it? That's their whole raison d'etre.
All right, so we're going to move on to the next round, which is I call the not so fire round. So I'll ask you questions with a very fast tone, but you can take your time answering it. So
okay, yeah, go, yeah.
All right. Other than a notebook and a pen, is there an essential tool that a sales engineer should be using?
Yes, so I would urge sales engineers to build their whiteboarding skills. Get some really nice pens. I know that sounds like it's really basic 101 stuff, but don't rely on the crappy pens that you find at a customer site, that happen to be hanging around for 10 years in the room with the flip chart. Take your own stuff and also learn some basic whiteboarding techniques. That might sound strange, but just spending an hour with a visual communications guy or reading some visual communications material will enhance your whiteboarding skills 100%, and it makes such a big difference. We all have times when we want to switch up the different media that we work with. So we want to pull things away from PowerPoint, we want to pull things away from the screen. We just want to get doing something more organic. Well, learn some good whiteboarding skills. Learn some diagrams that relate to your solution in advance. How you're going to build them up. How you're going to write them. So I would urge that, because you can make big improvements there, and also I could talk about stuff around storytelling and the kind of tell, show, tell loops that we learn in Demo to Win, that sort of thing. But I think most people know those things. But what I would say is spend a bit of time enhancing your whiteboarding skills. Everybody thinks they can't draw, and if you take that attitude, you're gonna produce something that's a real spaghetti mess. I can tell you now, everybody can draw, everybody can learn basic whiteboarding skills. I've learned them myself, and I've taught them to other people, and it makes such a big difference.
Is there a guide you would recommend for that?
I haven't seen a guide. There's a guy that I worked with at Oracle, Varick Torstenstein. And he was an absolute genius at that. But when I say genius, not because he was some sort of artistic genius. It was just great at teaching you some really simple techniques that raised your whiteboarding skills off the page and brought them to life, which was really, really useful.
I'll try to get them on the podcast then.
Yeah. I mean, try and do that. And it's just as simple as we've all got icons that we use in our mind. What are we going to draw for a man? What are we going to draw for, a car or a bus or a train or a plane or those things? And there's just really simple things that you can kind of copy and learn that will actually impress your customers quite a lot. Actually, when you start doing those, it just makes you look a lot more professional.
Sounds good. Is there a book or resource? That's question number 2, by the way.
Yeah, there's lots on those things. There's a lot of resources on how to kind of effectively draw things graphically very, very quickly off the top of your head.
Okay.
Let me come back to you on that one, because there's some that I've used. There's some resources that I've used for that. There's some online resources.
Yeah, for sure. I'll
give you some of those things.
Sounds good. I'll look forward to that email.
But guess but people carry around. I mean, going back to your initial point, carry around some really nice pens, and they chisel nibbed pens, not these bullet nibbed things that are rubbish. Some nice chisel nibbed pens, the ones where your writing looks really, really cool, rather than these bullet tipped things.
Why, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, because when you use chisel tip pens, and this is going into way too much detail now, when you write using those pens, it looks like a nice italic script. Whereas when you write with just a chisel nibs, it just looks like a scrawl. There's just no structure, very little structure to it.
Okay.
So if you use the right material, if you've got the right tools and you got the right pens, it just enhances everything you do so much.
All right. Question number 3, do you have any tips or tricks on time management and task organization?
That is a good point. So time management, these are very quick tips. I would always say that sleep trumps configuration. And what I mean by that is it's much more important to get a good night's sleep before a demonstration than adding that extra bell or whistle or anything like that. So don't be tempted to put an all-night configuration session just to get that extra piece of functionality in, even if your sales guy puts pressure on for you to do that. Arrive early, test the environment that you're going to be working in. So important. Also, if when you're preparing a very complex set of scripted demos, I was thinking about this the other day. And I always had this thing where if you're running out of time and you're not going to be able to have time to prepare all of the scenarios in your script, always put a disproportionate amount of effort onto the first scenario, and then work through from there, the first and then the second. And the reason that I say that is because if you can build trust with the customer early on, in let's say a full day of scripted demos, if you can build that trust early, when you come to the later ones, if the stuff you haven't done, then time is normally running out and they will believe that you can do that feature. And I've had that happen so many times where I've just gotten away with it because I've over prepared the first 2 or 3 scenarios.
You know what? This just answered the 4th question.
Yeah.
Which is, what advice would you give an SE that you feel they don't get from anybody? And I've never heard that advice from anyone before.
Well, that's one of these interesting tips. If you're running out of time, where do you invest? If you're running out of time, where do you invest it? So other advice I have is, when things go wrong in a demo, it's the old adage of it's not what happens to you, it's how you handle it, right? So if things go wrong, you can either say, you can either quickly move on to the next part of your demo, or you can stop, open your mouth in horror and say, oh, that's never happened before. And that's the worst possible thing that you can do. So, I've had really bad things happen in demos. And if you just move on and say, and that would pull these details over, and then just move on to the next part, the audience is looking at your reaction to something more than they're looking at what's just happened. Because an audience isn't reading everything that's happening on the screen. They're listening to your narrative. So if you just continue with your narrative and don't break narrative, you will be fine. If you stop in horror and highlight it, the fact that something terrible has gone wrong, then you'll turn, a slight kind of, slight issue that some people might spot, you'll turn that into something huge.
That's very good advice.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of other stuff. There's loads of where that came from. So
Well,
these
like,
are just the ones that came off the top of my head when I saw your questions.
maybe we can do another session and we can talk all about that. For now,
But what I would say to people though, as a kind of parting thought though, I would say to people, if you're an experienced solutions engineer, then be generous with passing on your knowledge and mentoring others and younger SE. It's such a fulfilling thing to do, and it just helps everybody.
that's very good advice, and that's why we're doing this, both of us right now. So you have your LinkedIn website, your LinkedIn page.
Yep.
Where people can find the blog. I'll have that in the show notes.
Okay,
is there
brilliant.
any other services that you provide for SEs?
Well, yeah. So the things that I normally do is, as mentioned before, I was a solution engineer leader, but the context of that was always within customer experience. So we do a lot of blogging about customer experience issues as well. My Twitter feed is at CXDaryn, and make sure you spell Daryn Daryn. So CXDaryn is my Twitter feed. Daryn Mason on LinkedIn, of course, and you can catch me there. And the other thing that I'm working on at the moment actually is something that I'm very passionate about, and that's win-loss analysis for large deals. I think that when we lose major deals, we don't analyze our losses and learn from them in the way that we should really be learning. And there's so many important lessons you can find from analyzing deal wins and losses. So that's something that I specialize in as well. So again, if anybody's interested in those subjects, then they can contact me.
All right, I will contact you then. That's it. That's all the questions that I have. I'm very happy you were able to make this, and this is the first time I talked to someone on a different continent for the podcast, and I'm very happy about that.
Well, it works pretty well. It's been really good talking to you, Ramsey.
Likewise, thank you for your time, and I'll hope to see you soon.
Great.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again, Daryn, for joining me today. I really appreciated it. And for you guys listening, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. I had a blast having this conversation with Daryn. It seems that every time I talk to an SE who's passionate about what they do, and they've been doing it for a while, it's just an amazing chat, and I want to just talk to them forever. Unfortunately, we have lives to go back to. We have work. So that's it. That's all I have. And as usual, if you find value in what we're providing, if you think this will help anybody, you can always rate, review, subscribe, and share it with people. Share it, because if it's useful to you, it's useful to somebody else. Obviously, if they're SEs or want to be SEs. Even if they're sales managers and they want to learn what SEs think. So that might be a little rude awakening for them, but have them listen to this. So, and that's it for me. Thank you guys for listening. I appreciate you. With that, this is Ramsey signing off.